and welcome to the TNT pre-show for Season 3, Episode 2. This is your opportunity to check your audio, check your video, pour yourself a glass of wine, cognac, Mountain Dew, or mineral water, and maybe have some creme caramel. Omicron is still sweeping through the population, so stay safe, follow the provincial guidelines, and be nice. Okay, now we're going to go to our full screen for our commercial. Thank you, Justine. So I want to encourage everyone out there to consider taking a membership. Individual memberships here at the Audain Art Museum are $75, or dual memberships are $100. So as per usual, we have a few items from our gift shop that we want to promote. The first is an absolutely beautiful book from the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, and it's the book that accompanies the exhibition Reinstalling, The Call of Northern Landscapes and Indigenous Cultures. It's got upwards of 15 authors and just a brilliant selection of works by Reinstalling, as well as some of the other artists that are featured in this show, like Pudlo Pudlat, Willie Seaweed, as well as Bo Dick. The other item that we'd like to promote this evening from our shop is by one of the artists also featured in our collection, and that's Paul Wong, and this book is called Occupying Chinatown. Paul Wong is featured in the lobby through a major commission work in neon, and this book is really a brilliant document of many of his efforts over the course of his career, and Paul Wong being one of the foremost screen-based artists in Canada. So these are selling like hotcakes, so get them soon. All right, we're getting closer to the hour. I go into the little screen now, Justine. And as we chatter along, I would just like to remind everyone that the museum remains open from Thursday to Sunday, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I would encourage everyone to come here après ski or before skiing or during skiing. Anything to do with skiing and art is a great combination in Whistler. And we have a wonderful offering from our permanent collection, which we've just updated with a number of recent acquisitions that are on display now. And we'll be talking about some of those later in TNT, as well as the Reinstalling exhibition, The Call of Northern Landscapes and Indigenous Cultures, that is here until February 21st. And I would say this is one of the most important temporary exhibitions that the museum has mounted over the course of its very short history, with more excellent exhibitions to come. So I see that we have 15 seconds to the hour, which allows me to get rid of some paper here and get close to the beginning of our show. Again, I would take a drink before it starts and relax. Okay, so let's go big screen, Justine. Welcome to Tuesday Night Talks, Season 3, Episode 2. And I want to have a special thanks to Susan Roop for her support of Season 3. Omicron is still upon us here in British Columbia, as well as across Canada. So again, respect your provincial guidelines, stay safe, and always be nice. Tonight, we're by the flashlights glow here in the Audain Art Museum's vault that contains all of the works that aren't on display. It's a very active spot as we continue to grow this collection. Tonight, we have over 300 viewers registered, so we're just thrilled that TNT remains a very positive and popular experience for all of you. We're going to discuss the many facets of the work behind me, which is an actual scale model generously donated by the artist to the museum. And now we're going to go live to East Vancouver from the living room, I think, of art collector Mira Malatestinik. I hope I said that right, Mira. To Reece Terris. Good evening, Reece.
Hey, Curtis. Thanks for having me. Thanks so much.
Wonderful to have you on tonight. And this is a real thrill. I've been an admirer of your work for some time now. And I thought it would be wonderful to start with a major piece that predates your bridge work. And that's American Standard, which was an installation in the men's washroom at Fraser University in Burnaby that was part of your grad show. So can you begin with just a quick discussion of the inspiration for this piece, Reece?
Sure, I'd be happy to chat about it. It was a very interesting project for me, and inspiration-wise, I don't know. It's a long time ago now, but I really like to mess with things, and I guess that's what inspires me is just kind of making things that are typically concretized or reified. I like to make them plastic, and I like to show how easy it is to change things. Well, maybe not easy, but possible. And inspiration-wise, I was a student at the time, and I kept looking at this idea of like Duchamp like changing things up, where he's like, it's not so much about the context of the gallery. The gallery really makes the piece, right? So you could stick anything in there and call it art in a way. And I thought that was very interesting, at the time. And I thought, well, if that's the case, then I'm going to make these into multiples and kind of turn the whole idea of context on its head, right? And actually put the primacy of that back to the object instead of the space that the object resides in. So, that's sort of the Duchampian tenant around it, but in reality, it's just a blast to mess with stuff, and I love that I have the skill to do that and the luck to get away with it. So,
how did you convince the curator that your space for your grad presentation would in fact wouldn't be a gallery space, but in fact the men's washroom, which, as everyone can see, you transformed in a very incredible way?
Well, I didn't really ask. I kind of asked. Alison Clay was my prof at the time, and I asked if I could come in and do some work over the Christmas break before the next semester started. And she's like, "That's fine." And this is my idea. And it was like a real soft sell. And I kind of showed some models and little paper cutouts and stuff. And she asked if there would be any water involved, and I said, no, I'll make sure it's dry and no problem, no water. And then proceeded to go to work with it. You can see there's a lot of stuff going on there, like the heater's raised on the lower right-hand side of the photograph, so that if it ever comes on, there's not an issue with the electrical. And on the lower left-hand side, you can see a little rectangular cutout. All that water flows from the bathroom floor into a pump and gets recirculated through all the urinals.
And approximately how many gallons of water would be in the room at one time?
I can't remember exactly how much water. I had that all figured out. I used a company called Canadian Dewatering to supply the pump based on the actual cubic meters of water that's in there. And more concerning was the live load, because there's a lot of weight there. And then if people are walking in there, so I cored the floor, and I had an engineer sign off on it saying that the loads wouldn't be a problem. So can't answer that one.
Okay. And did you do actually all the plumbing and the installing of each of the urinals and the other parts of this piece?
I did, yeah. I did all the plumbing, all the tiling, everything. Yeah, and all the mechanical work. The biggest scare was like shutting off the main water supply, which is like a 4-inch stack inside of the building, and just the whole building shutters. And so anyway, it all worked out. Nothing bad happened. So yeah, I did all the plumbing and everything that you see there.
Let's go to, we have another angle on this image. And Reece, can you maybe discuss some of the interactions that visitors had with this piece?
Sure, yeah. So this was during the undergrad show, And you can see by the stepping stones there, which is like a 12 by 12 tile that are just up above the foot of water. And people would actually get really comfortable with the piece for whatever reason and walk in there and use the toilet or just use it like a lake or a pond. So I would always pour a cup of bleach in there just to make sure nobody got like pink eye. It was a really strange experience over the course of the project. But anyway, it was really an amazing, phenomenologically speaking. You could hear it from everywhere in the gallery. And as you approach down the hallway and open the door, it was just like a rush of mist and spray and temperature change. So it was really, really fantastic to experience.
Huh. And were there any accidents? And the other thing I wanted to ask is, what year was this executed in, and how long did it last as an exhibition?
It's 2004, I believe, the graduating year, and it lasted like over the summer. I asked if I could keep it going to properly photograph it. So I built on the wall on the right there that you can see with nothing on it. We built a big, huge lighting rack, and I had a buddy of mine, Cedric Bomford. He's a successful artist working out of UVic. We shot the whole thing in 4x5, and so this is before stitching programs and all of the 4x5. You know, we use the adjustable back to kind of line up all those vanishing points of each urinal in that large stitch photograph that you guys started with, and we made a composite photograph out of it. It was just too hard to get a photograph of the whole thing from anywhere else, but it was quite a process. No accidents.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
Now, because your work is so fleeting and ephemeral, how does photography play into the residual object that you can then, you know, offer to collectors and museums and institutions and in general?
That's really important. I'm glad you brought it up. It's an interesting practice. It's more performative. And you know, like you said, you mentioned the word ephemeral, and I kind of think of it almost like dance, you know, where I'm a huge fan of dance, and I go see shows now and then when they're actually happening, and it's a thing you have to experience. But if you do a good job with the photograph or with the video documentation or with how you're representing the piece, you know, those things can have legs too and stand on their own. And I think in the case of American Standard, the first photograph was made that way, like the shot where everything was stitched together. That shot really was made to have a life beyond the actual sculpture or the installation. So I go into these projects with that in mind, and in this case, it really worked out. So you know, I was really fortunate to put the time in. It almost takes me longer to take a photograph of the work than to make the work, and that's pretty much the same for all of it. And it's really important to do that, just because I want to be able to have some kind of connection to what happened in a way that people can really understand it. And also then I have something that I can offer to collectors like you suggest.
Great. Okay, so in a similar vein, we're going to move to the next piece that in fact is based, or the model was created afterwards, but here is the initial construction of the bridge. And can you describe where this project is and how you conceived of it?
Sure. You see the house to the right with the vinyl siding. There's a little room back there, and that's where I would sit, and that was sort of my office. I do construction as my day job and contracting. And I kept looking at the proximity of these two houses. They're so close together, and there's always just something tickling at the back of my head. And I thought, like, what's strange about the lot, first of all, is that it's not, the houses aren't in the same plot. They're not like forward in the yard. You can see the house in the foreground there with the black siding and the white window trims. That one's back and the other one's forward. So there's this odd condition that's created there. And the more I looked at it, I kept thinking bridge, but I just didn't understand. And then something clicks at a certain point, and it was about this leisure space, like a deck to a deck, and crossing a property line that really got me going on the project, at least like inspirationally speaking, and then it culminated in the actual project being made.
Excellent. Let's move to the next shot. Can you just talk about the materials and the engineering of this work of art?
Sure. Well, there was no engineering. It's based off of a Chinese tapestry where they would have these woven bridges where, you know, each triangle kind of compresses down on a cross section. So I just took it from there. There's a man, Mr. Pedersen in Seashelt, and he used to make these bridges for like over small ditches and things like that. And I talked to him, and he understood the geometry and the math behind it. And so I went and gave him the numbers and figured out all the angles to cut it and put it together. And so yeah, no engineering, because I don't think any engineer would sign off on it, that's for sure. But it's a radial design, so really it's just a section of a circle, like wherever your endpoint is, you can look at it like that. It's not an ellipse, but it's radial. And so you can see that's me in the red shirt, and that's my neighbor. We became really fast friends with. His name's Gwendol Castellan, and that's his house where we're building it over his home. But they just moved in before I conceived of this idea, and just before they were leaving on a holiday for a month to France, I asked if I could build a bridge, and I said I was an artist and I'd love to build a little bridge over to their house. And they said, sure. And they left. And then they came back to this monstrosity on top, like built on top of their roof and onto their deck. And I didn't really ask for permission. And he was kind enough not to sue me and actually help me finish the project. So it was really interesting the way it all worked out in terms of the neighborhood getting behind it.
And let's go to the next shot. So as you mentioned, it's from 2006, is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
And it's in East Vancouver, is that also correct?
Yeah, this is near McSpadden Park on McSpadden Avenue. And so that bridge where it's landing, that's actually landing on my neighbor's property, and then it goes up and over top of their roof and lands back onto my deck. And so this was actually, like the opening was sort of condoned or supported by Presentation House Gallery. So they did a mail out for me. And so we had a nice opening where all kinds of gallery goers would come and have a drink in the backyard and walk up and over the bridge. And it was open all day long. People could walk through my house, or I'd come home and oftentimes people would be in the bridge or in my yard or in my house. So that was kind of interesting to come home to people just being attracted to it, to the sculpture. So I really enjoyed that aspect of the piece.
And how did you manage access to the piece, and how long was it in place for?
It's probably in place for about 4 or 5 months, maybe a little longer. We managed access to the piece during the opening by having like somebody on either side of the span, making sure that only like 1 or 2 people went up at a time. But that kind of fell apart, and there was a time then there was like 6 or 7 people up in the center of the bridge bouncing around on it. So, that's not what you want to see happen when you're not sure how it's all going to hold together. But it did, and after that, it really was just like a come as you will kind of thing. People would just walk into the yard, go through the gate, or and go through across the fence and up the stairs from my neighbor's house and across the bridge, and then down out through my house or whatever. So it's very porous, and I actually watched it happen several times where people just had no idea about it, but actually saw it from the sidewalk and then just walked into the yard, which is fantastic.
Okay, now we'll move to the next image, please. And this is the model that is actually right behind me. And this was created after the bridge piece. And maybe talk about why you created the model and how that becomes an extension of the bridge after it's gone.
Yeah, actually the idea is Grant Arnold's a curator at the Vancouver Art Gallery, and he said to me that the photographs are great, but it's really such an experience that maybe you could get a little bit more of that experience across if you worked on a maquette or a model like this. So this is actual model, as you mentioned at the start of the introduction about the piece. Like that's 2 city lots in East Vancouver, and you can see how the fence boards are moved off to the sides. That's for people who would come in and duck through the fence and go up the stairs at the neighbor's house and then over onto my house. So the model really became this way of representing the piece in 3 dimensions that I think was really important and really lent a lot to the photographs. So I'm super happy that you guys have it in the collection, of course.
And we're very grateful, Reece, that you donated this model as well as a number of the photo documents of the work, because then, as I mentioned earlier, such an ephemeral practice as yours, we're able to kind of keep some kind of grip on it. And let's move to some of those photos, please. Now, Reece, I'm really curious about your neighbor's initial reaction when they returned from France.
Well, yeah, like it was starting to get out of hand when I was building it. Like you could see that there was that working platform that you showed in the, you know, the construction photos. And that's how it was built, with like a lintel that we could hang the arch from. And I realized that I better send them an email and say, hey, you know, like this is kind of getting out of hand. But I just kind of soft sold it and said, you know, it's going great. It goes over your house and it's looking great. And I just sort of got this email question mark back, you know, question mark. And Tanya, that's Gwendole's partner, she came home first and was like, what is going on? And then when Gwendole arrived back a couple days later, they lent a hand and we'd kind of have a beer up there or share a bowl of sugar or breakfast or whatever. It was really bizarre, but lovely people to be next to. They were long suffering neighbors to the east. That's what I call them.
Okay. Let's move on to the next shot of your long suffering neighbors.
Yeah.
And this is really captures it from the park, and you know how subtly it makes a wonderful accent on, you know, the vernacular architecture of East Van.
It does, yeah, that's a really great point. And I think, you know, that leads into the whole idea that it's the neighborhood that actually allowed it to happen. Like if I was somewhere else, it would have been shut down right away. And everybody was really interested to see how it was going and really excited that there was an opening and could actually use it. And it kind of became this thing. And I also think the form of the bridge, like having a beginning and the end, it wasn't like I was building a, you know, a Tower of Babel or something. So people said, okay, it's going to stop over there, you know. And I think the neighborhood really allowed the piece to happen, you know.
Great. Let's move to the next image, please. So again, another perspective on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about a little bit of the photographic process here, because you were well within the early generations of digital photography?
Yeah, well, this is actually a 4x5 image, and this is in collaboration with Blaine Campbell. He had some really great equipment. He came out and we set the shot up together, and the 4x5 shots are with him. And so this is kind of riffing off of like the Vancouver school. You can really see like a similarity in the way that it's taking in the neighborhood. And what I find really compelling, at least for me, is there's like a real rip and a tear in that fabric of like that Vancouver school, where it's about the sculpture, but it's just a little suggestion in there, right? So this could fit into that kind of method, and it actually, you know, no pun intended, kind of bridges out of that in some way into sculpture and installation. So I really like that it places itself. It looks like a Vancouver photograph. And you can, of course, see the layering, the alley. It's kind of a close-up, and then you can see the next level, and then way in the background, the city. So it's got a really wonderful perspective of all levels of that neighborhood and community beyond it.
Well, that's a great comment, Reece, in terms of how the photographic process of this work edges into that Vancouver School of Conceptual Photography, and hence it becomes something else after the bridge has actually been taken apart. So let's move. We have one more photograph, I believe. Thank you. So that's another wonderful angle. Where is the bridge now, Reece?
It's in my uncle's barn. It's all like those, because it's radial. It's all basically packed up like a piece of IKEA furniture. It all just assembles, and every piece is the same size. So there's only like 3 or 4 measurements that you have to execute in that work to make it into that form, and it just clicks together.
And would you ever consider reinstalling the bridge at some point in the future, if the circumstances presented themselves?
If the context is right, like I was asked to install it here or there, but it's really a comment on property values and property lines, and the same stuff ad nauseum. Like, I've got a barbecue, you've got a barbecue, I've got 2 plastic chairs, I've got 2 plastic chairs, you've got a deck, I've got a deck, everybody's just working their asses off and chained to their mortgage. And it just kind of gets you over top of all that stuff. And you look down and you see this repetitive condition, right? Where there's a fence and there's a yard and there's the same stuff. And it really like pulls you up out of it. And you kind of get this omnipotent view of like how we're structuring the way we live, right? It's communal, but it's not really communal. And I'm not suggesting that we all like go hang out in the hot tub together, but at the same time, we're really stuck in this model, right? And the bridge just kind of broke that for me. And so the answer maybe would be no.
Okay. Except I suppose maybe if the National Gallery came calling, you might sell it to
Sure,
them.
no problem. They can have it.
Okay, I'll see what I can do with my friend Sasha on that one. Okay. Now is actually one of my favorite parts of TNT, and that's the question and answer. And we were fortunate to receive quite a number of questions through the day. And for those of you watching, if you want to send something in through the chat function, and if it's not within the context of the questions we already have, we may be able to put them on. However, earlier today, we were fortunate, as I said, to get a number of questions. And Ronnie from Vancouver asks, what concerns did your neighbors have when you negotiated attaching a bridge to their home and providing daily access to strangers?
Well, Ronnie, I think I kind of answered the question. I really didn't ask. I just sort of did it and sort of asked for forgiveness. But you're right. Like once they were home, I kind of had to make it a little more of an official ask, and they were fantastic. And everybody in the community was amazing. It was a real lucky break and a really nice way to start a relationship.
Well, okay, so it's a relationship building project. Keith from Aurelia asks, what is the process that you undertake from concept to realization when you approach a project like the bridge or like American Standard and some of the things that we're going to look at in a few minutes?
Yeah, that's a great question. It took me a long time to figure that out. Like I just wasn't aware. Like I just didn't know what I was doing. Like for instance, there's a piece called the Western Front, and I had to go there to take some measurements, and I was there for 8 hours taking measurements that would take about 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And then I started to think back about what I was doing, and I would always just go and inhabit these spaces that spoke to me in some way or that I was considering for an installation. And what I realized I was doing was it was almost like I was like soaking up the way that this was going to go and how it was going to work structurally and how it would actually work functionally. And then like that energy that goes into just being in a space and then giving it time to percolate really informed a lot of the aesthetic choices too. So it took a long time, and it still does. Like it's very contemplative. Like it looks just like I'm going to do this thing, but it never really works like that. It's like there's something that tickles you, and you keep coming back to it, and then all of a sudden an idea starts to form and crystallize. And once it's there, you still spend a lot of time just meditating in that space. And it sounds a little zen, but it's strange. It's a long process to get that sort of way through it, that course through it.
Okay, thank you. The next question comes from Barbara in Poco. Port Coquitlam? Good, I pronounced that properly. What do you consider your primary media?
Well, the built environment and architecture for sure. I mean, I came to Simon Fraser University as an undergrad later in life. I was in my late 20s, early 30s. Like I guess I was 29 or 30. And I already knew how to build, and I already had all these sort of questions about suburban environments and urban environments and what it meant to like just clear cut a hill and build a bunch of houses on it, like how it felt, right? So I guess yeah, my primary medium is definitely the built environment and manipulating anything to do with it.
Excellent, thank you. Joseph from Burnaby asked, Do you feel as though there's a loss when you move from the actual site-based projects to the photo documents, or is there a gain in the photo documents conversely?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Sometimes it's a loss and sometimes it's a gain. But I'd say like it's more like a 60-40, 70-30 split. Like I think the piece usually, has supremacy to some degree, but the photographs, like especially American Standard and some of the bridge photographs, really went well. And sometimes they don't, and so they just kind of sit in the dustbin, right? But the piece could be a very successful piece. So yeah, I mean, there is a loss, but it depends how prepared you are to try and capture what you've provided there sculpturally.
And I can say from the museum's perspective, when we had this model on display, as well as a series of your photographs during a micro exhibition this past fall, it was very well received. So from a museum perspective, I think these projects live on very well in the various reiterations. So this is my favorite question tonight. Ivy from Vancouver asks, have you ever encountered difficulties with either bylaw officers or the police with your site-based creation?
Well, that's a great question, and I almost have, but I haven't. So I've been lucky enough to make it look like it's official. Like the Western Front again was a very public installation on a street corner, not like buried away in a fourth floor men's washroom that you can kind of sneak away. So we had like a flagger crew there. We had a crane thing. We had someone else with a clipboard with a bunch of paperwork that didn't really say anything on it. And at the same time, we were lifting this facade. If you don't know the piece, we lifted a facade onto a facade. And there was an inspection of like a new apartment tower right next door. And the inspector kind of walked over and everything looked in order and they just left. So, sometimes you get lucky, but we're definitely prepared in terms of how it's approached. Like engineers are always consulted. We aren't cavalier about anyone's safety. That's for sure. I'm not. I don't know where the we came from, but anyway, like I guess it's a we because there's a lot of people help me do this stuff. I can't build it all myself, right? So there's always a we, I guess.
Okay, and for the final question this evening, and comes from Natasha from Vancouver, and she asks, what do you think attracts visitors to these large-scale site-based creations? What's the hook that you perceive people are attracted by?
Well, I think the hook, and it's a great question. I think that they exist in a space that you don't expect anything like that to be. And like that photograph we were talking about with the alley view, there's just this weird rainbow bridge or a bridge popping out of the trees, and it goes over top of a house. Like it's very surreal, but it's it's an actual thing, and so you can get closer to it and you can start to view it from all angles, and it becomes, I think what happens there is it really becomes a discovery, like a personal discovery for somebody, because they're not really like announced, or there's not a lot of fanfare. They just sort of happen. And so when those things happen and you stumble upon them, I think there's a real fantastic discovery for the person that's looking or viewing and thinking. And at the same time, like it starts to mess with all your memory. Was that there before, or wasn't it there? Because everything's so up and down in Vancouver. You'll come here in 10 years and you're not going to recognize most of the routes that you would have taken. So I think it's a really interesting question. I think it really comes down to how people receive what they're looking at in their environment.
Excellent answer. Thank you. So now we'll return to your work, and there's some real wonderful shots here, some incredible projects that you've undertaken. The first is from the Vancouver Art Gallery, where you created an entire apartment. So I'll just offer our viewers the next image. And for those of you that are familiar with the Vancouver Art Gallery, this is the grand staircase that greets you, and the VAG is a former courthouse building. And this project entailed you creating, 6 floors of an apartment through the center of this space. We'll go to the next image, please. These are some of your drawings in terms of how you were able to conceive the different decades that would be featured on each floor. And then the next slide is where we'll begin our discussion. This is the start of the transformation of that space. And Reece, if you can tell our viewers when this happened and what they're looking at here.
Sure, yeah, this is a piece called Aught Apartment, and O-U-G-H-T as in 00, Aught, or Aught, like the moral connotation. But yeah, so what you're looking at is the same staircase that you started with, which is the beginning floor of the rotunda of the entrance into the Vancouver Art Gallery. And you could see that the marble's been replaced with like a hardwood strip flooring, etc. So what is happening here is you have a living room, a bathroom, and a kitchen in the 50s, and then you have it repeated in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s up to the aughts. And so hence the name. So what I was trying to do here was unload a lot of stuff that I would take out of the houses that were renovating. But seriously, like I was complicit in throwing all this stuff away. Like typically we get in a house either going to get torn down or get renovated or remodeled. And I just kept collecting it, you know, and I would like, maybe it's going to be for a cabin one day. And that would never happen because they have like so much stuff. And so it just made sense to me that all of a sudden this could be put together in some kind of a representation of the actual thing, which is kind of fascinating. And there's kind of a real post-war critique going on here regarding you know, conspicuous consumption. Like, you know, you can see things cycle out in almost like a filmic way, like tying into Vancouver as a set city, and like how we understand things through cinema is like contained in this piece. So it embodies a whole bunch of the way we consume time and the way we inhabit it, and the objects that actually mark that time. So that's what the piece is about.
Great, and we'll just cycle through a few of the different floors. So here, as we see, we come up, which level is this at, Reece?
So this is the 60s. You can see the shag rug there. Anyway, so that's the 60s. You see the 60s, you're looking into the living room with the in-wall TV with the mahogany paneling from Japan. And then you're looking up into the cube that is the 70s on the next level, getting pushed up into the next section of the gallery.
Okay, let's move to the next slide. This is a wonderful cross-section slide. And we were discussing earlier how some people would go into the bathroom portion of this installation and leave presents.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of little kids, you know, they'd go, or maybe some, you know, interesting people that, you know, needed to do whatever. But so yeah, little guys would go in there, they'd close the door and they'd use the toilet, it happened several times. And so that would be in the 50s and then in the 80s, because that's the two floors, like in the first level. And then you can see the sort of the railing just below at the bottom of this picture. That would be the 80s. And that's, you know, the next level, the third floor of the VAG. So what was great for me about this piece was it actually got to push and play with the architecture. The actual architecture of the Vancouver Art Gallery became like the apartment walls on the 50s and the 80s floors. And the rest of them are contained in like this very rigid scaffolding footprint. So it was really lovely to do that. There are all kinds of elements within the VAG that kind of morphed in and out of the piece. So playing with the architecture was a real lot of fun.
Okay, we're going to cycle through a few more images. This is the top floor in the aughts where we have screens. Anything to comment on the top floor here?
Yeah, there's, you know, you can't see it in these pictures, but there's some really interesting things happening. Like you can see how up at the very top, there's those three lights that are coming down into the, you know, kind of adding some top light and also some visual interest up into the ocular or the dome. And those are turkey brooding heaters. And I built this piece in the barn. Like my uncle has a bunch of barns out in Langley where they're 1/4 mile long and some of them are derelict and just used for storage. And so I asked if I could build this piece out there. So that's sort of an homage to him letting me use the space and my aunt letting me use the space. And so I repurposed those brooding heaters and turned them into amazing like lights. So that's something I'd love to say about that for.
Okay, and the next slide is the 50s, and it's below the stairwell. But even more interesting, Reece, we're going to go to the next shot, and you actually, in your uncle's barn in Langley, and we'll move ahead one more slide, before the project took place, you kind of mimicked that space in the Vancouver Art Gallery to allow you to plan this work.
Yeah, that's right. So what you're looking at there is the actual scale, like those walls, the white walls, those are the actual dimension of the Vancouver Art Gallery walls. That's the whole first floor rotunda. And you can see the pipe there and the strings that go across that mimics the underside of the concrete. So I had a one-to-one replica of the gallery actually in the barn. So for the first floor of the Vancouver Art Gallery, I had it built exactly to scale. And then also for the third floor, so the 50s and the 80s, so that I could actually cut everything to fit and we could install the piece within, a couple of weeks or, 3 weeks, 4 weeks instead of like forever. So everything was cut and those lines are all within like 1/8 of an inch, like including the baseboard heights, the underside of concrete heights, everything. And you can see the relationship there. That last photograph you went through, it's perfect.
Okay, so we'll move to your next project. And this is actually one of the scale reproductions in your uncle's barn. And then the next project is the Western Front. For those of our viewers who are not familiar, the Western Front is one of Canada's most famous artist-run centers in Vancouver. And for this project, you added to the facade, as we can see in this dual shot before and after. And let's go to the next slide, and that gives everyone a proper view of what you were able to accomplish at this artist-run center. Can you speak to the process of creating it and why you created this work?
Sure. I was asked to come up with an idea, and I just couldn't think of anything, and I just kept looking at it, and once again there was something there, and then I finally understood what it was. It's kind of this Italianate architecture with a false front, which is a very Western trope architecturally speaking, like in boomtown architecture, where you'd have you had to have some kind of signifier architecturally, like a psychogeographical cue that you're downtown. And this might not be exactly that. It's not like a tent behind like a false front in a logging town, but it kind of harkens back to that. And so I had this really amazing moment where this is at 2010. So it was perfect timing for the Olympics. So you could kind of look at it that you're putting on your best front or your facade. And I'm like, well, then why not like even another facade? And so it's called Western Front, another false front. And once again, this is like a real estate critique, sort of boomtown architecture critique, a boomtown critique. In the first shot you showed, there's actually like a boardwalk there. So it kind of activated anybody on the walk by. You can see on the picture on the right, you can see that sort of new wood there. So that's all recycled telephone poles cut down and turned into a boardwalk. So it's really mimicking that. People would walk and clank along the sound. And back to the lady, I think it was Ivy, or maybe it wasn't Ivy, but someone's question about police and inspections and planning.
Well, let's go to that install shot.
Sure, yeah, perfect.
There we go.
So these shots are all, the night shots are all by Rachel Topham. She's a local photographer, does a great job. Also did all the bag catalog. But you can see right here that at the sidewalk there is no boardwalk. So that's the only thing I got busted on. They're like, hey, you can't have that boardwalk there. That's super unsafe. And meanwhile, there was like a 60-foot by 12-foot gigantic thing stuck on top of the building. And it's really funny that they called me on the boardwalk instead of the actual facade, but I'm happy that they didn't. I couldn't take it off anyway. What could I do?
Well, you've done a wonderful job on not only mimicking a facade, but mimicking the requirements of builders. So let's go to your next project, which I believe was in Philadelphia.
That's right.
You transformed this sign, which was part of a larger facade. Let's move to that shot that was very well known in Philadelphia. And here's where the manipulation begins. If we move to the next facade shot, and perhaps you can introduce the project and what your reasoning was behind this creation.
Sure. I was asked by Philadelphia Sculptor Association to come to Philadelphia and do a piece. And so this building had gone bankrupt. Globe Dye Works as a company had gone bankrupt. This piece, I think, was in 2012. And it had been there for literally over a century, generation upon generation of people dyeing all kinds of fabrics in this location. And when I arrived, it was, kind of taken over, and there were artists in there, and they were kind of, trying to gentrify it to some degree and kind of reactivate it with art projects. And so I was lucky enough to be asked to come, and the water tower just struck me, this whole idea that you could see there's that globe which had North and South America on a porcelain sign with this backlit sign, Globe Dye Works. And so I really love the letters in this sort of Lawrence Wiener kind of way, where I could just make an anagram and speak to the idea of globalization and what it means to hollow out like a whole neighborhood, for offshoring. So the whole piece is about globalization and where that's taken us. It was a bit nerve-wracking, like actually making a comment in a city like that, but there it is.
So the words Globe Dye Works, the transformation of that sign using the actual elements from it become Goodbye Work.
Yep.
Tell us about the moments where you arrived at that Goodbye Work phrase from Globe Dye Works.
I don't know. It just seemed to, I don't know how that happens, but it just seemed to make sense. And it's so much fun, to make these pieces, and it's nice to be in the world and kind of be commenting at this level, like where you're actually messing around with, places that people live near, or, it just becomes part of the urban landscape. So for me, it's just a lot of fun, but it's also like there's a lot of political and underpinnings, right? Like there's like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And so this is just kind of pointing that out. Look, why don't we have any businesses left here except for coffee shops and baristas and Home Depots? Like, you know what I mean? Like, or building houses. There's not much here anymore. So it's just kind of this reduction, right? And so I'm commenting on that reduction, and I don't know how it happens, but I really liked it. If anybody knows the work of Gordon Matta Clark, he did a piece where he kind of did a Charlie Chaplin-esque piece where he went up into a clock tower and watched the tower, and he was like up on a high-rise building. So it's kind of akin to that kind of guerrilla work.
Okay, so now we're going to move to the final piece in tonight's discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And this took place in Austria, and it's also your backdrop. So can you talk about this site and its former use, and then how you were able to transform it as well?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So I was invited to Austria to take part in this artist residency in the Alps, and this is maybe an hour and a half out of Innsbruck. And I was invited there through George Rammel, who's a longtime sculptor here, fantastic artist, and he hooked me up with these people who really like my work, and so I went. And when I was there, we were just supposed to respond to the site, and what you can't see out of the frame is a gigantic dam. There's a huge hydroelectric tower. You can just see in the very far right, in the middle of the shot, like a pipe, and that's a pipeline. Takes all the hydro down to the generators and turbines, and these mountains actually are all hollowed out, and inside of there, like a whole bunch of turbines. It's like absolutely incredible, the scale of the hydroelectric power projects that they've got there. But what I found out was that these buildings that you see here, Hemingway actually would go there and ski, and he'd do some writing in one of the buildings. But these buildings are actual barracks from the before the Second World War, and a lot of prisoners of war were conscripted to work on the dams. And so I just came up with this agitprop piece where it's like a very agitated propaganda, where people are driving by in the tourist buses, and it really harkens back to that. There was a kind of a root history here, in how that the dam actually happened. So that's where the work camp comes from.
Great. Let's cycle forward. So this is the words work camp, and we get a better perspective on these barracks. And the next shot, please. and then you added the word art camp. And
Yeah.
again, you seem to play with words. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. I guess I'll try. I guess I'll try. Uh, I don't know if I play with words, but it just seemed to make sense, and it's nice that those two were kind of so close together. I was really interested in it, and being an English speaker in a place that speaks German was interesting. I mean, it's fluent enough, and the words at least camp crosses over enough, so I was comfortable with it. There's I don't know. It's not really it's not really a thing. It's just like an installation that seemed to make sense. But one interesting note is that the font is actually a Deutsch industrial norm that was developed the font was developed in 1933. So there's all these kind of weird spin outs in terms of like what's the most efficient text, and well, it just happened to be from Germany at that exact time. So there's all kinds of interesting pieces of the puzzle that make it happen. So yeah, I can't really say
well, we'll
exactly
cycle
why.
through a few of the install shots. I guess that's you on the roof.
That's me, yeah.
And the next shot, people get a sense of the scale of these letters and the setting. It's a beautiful valley in the Alps, I'm assuming. And then the last shot is taken, which is the same work. Any closing comments on this piece, Reece?
Yeah, I'm not sure if people can see it, but if you look where all the cars are parked, you can see the work camp up on the left and then the art camp down in the center. And it's really less about, it's almost like what's lovely about this piece is that it just draws you in, and then the text becomes like another layer on top of something that's just very satisfying to look at. So I love that it kind of layers up that way.
And then this residual photograph in black and white, again, moves this piece forward and I suppose, supersedes the ephemeral nature of what you do. And so we're happy to have you in front of it as well as on the screen. And I want to thank you, Reece, for such a fascinating talk this evening. And I also have a number of thank yous to Michael Audain and Yoshi Carousel for their ongoing support. Similarly to our trustees and founders who enable this museum to keep propelling itself forward even in the most difficult times. As I mentioned earlier, Susan Roop, who is our patron for season 3 of TNT. Our hardworking team and volunteers here at the museum are always appreciated. I want to thank our crew here at TNT, which is Justine Nickel, our director and producer, and Paige Keith, our quality control coordinator. I want to thank you, the viewer, and our members for their ongoing support. As always, I have a few little shout outs. Season 3 is dedicated to my parents, Anne and Roy Collins. Hi to my little sister Susie in Canada, who stays up late every Tuesday. And hello to Sheila and Randy on the farm in Ingersoll, Ontario. I believe you have a few shout outs, Reece?
I do, yeah. I'd love to say thank you so much to Sarah Cree and Freya, my daughter, and Etta, my new daughter, which is pretty fantastic, having a house full of girls. And I'd like to say thank you very much to Mira for letting me use her living room and drink her scotch, and also to Tom Gautreau for taking an interest in my work and ultimately getting it at the Audain, which has been a real honor for me. And one final thing, I'd just like to give a shout out to my dad, Bob Terris, and my mom, Phyllis Terris, for all their support. Thank you.
Great. Well, next week, our feature artist will be Andrew Datson, and we'll be back in the permanent collection looking at his recent addition to the permanent collection. And from the Audain Art Museum in Whistler, British Columbia, I want to say good night to our viewers and good night to you, Reece Terris in East Vancouver. This is your chance to say good night, Reece.
Oh, good night. Thank you so much for listening and for asking all the questions.
Okay, take care.